Welcome, mystery enthusiasts. Tonight, witness a legendary actor's final performance, dancing with death itself in London's most elegant theatre. When phantom meets reality, only Poirot's little grey cells can unveil the truth. Where are you listening from? Share your location below. The autumn rain drummed a melancholy rhythm against the tall windows of the majestic theatre, where the final performance of The Phantom's Embrace had concluded to thunderous applause barely 2 hours before. The theatre, one of London's most prestigious venues, now stood in that peculiar twilight state between triumph and emptiness that follows every great performance. The echoes of applause still seeming to whisper through the ornate corridors, while shadows gathered in the vacant seats like spectral audience members reluctant to depart. In the Star's dressing room on the second floor, surrounded by wilting roses and congratulatory telegrams that proclaimed him London's greatest living actor, sat Sir Aubrey Blackwood in his leather chair before the mirror. At 68, he remained a commanding presence both on and off the stage, his silver hair perfectly groomed, his bearing still regal despite the years. Tonight, however, something was profoundly wrong with this familiar tableau. Sir Aubrey was slumped forward slightly, his hands resting on the dressing table as though he had been in the act of removing his stage makeup. He wore the elaborate costume from the final scene, a midnight blue velvet jacket with silver embroidery, the very outfit in which he had performed his legendary Dance of the Departed. With the mysterious phantom figure that had made this production the talk of London, his face, partially turned toward the mirror, bore an expression of profound surprise, as though death had interrupted him mid-thought. The discovery was made by Miss Estelle Vane, his leading lady and rumoured romantic interest, who had returned to the theatre to retrieve a forgotten bracelet. She had noticed the light still burning beneath his door unusual, as Sir Aubrey was habitually prompt in his departures. Her piercing scream echoed through the theatre's marble corridors, bringing the night watchman running and setting in motion events that would soon require the most delicate and precise investigation. Inspector Bradshaw of Scotland Yard arrived within the quarter hour, his practical mind immediately troubled by what he found. The dressing-room door had been locked from the inside, the key still in place. The windows, 3 stories above the street, were securely latched and showed no signs of disturbance. Most perplexing of all, Dr. Pemberton, Sir Aubrey's personal physician who had been summoned from his nearby residence, could find no immediate cause of death. His heart appears sound. Doctor, Pemberton murmured, adjusting his spectacles as he completed his preliminary examination. No signs of violence, no indication of poison that I can detect. The man was in excellent health when I last examined him. This is most irregular, Inspector. As word of Sir Aubrey's death spread through the theatre, a small but significant group began to gather in the corridor outside the dressing room. Each had remained in the building for various reasons, and each, Inspector Bradshaw would soon discover, had complex relationships with the deceased actor. Lady Cordelia Montfort, the theatre's principal patron and a woman of considerable influence in London society, had been hosting a private reception in the theatre's salon. Her composed exterior barely concealed what appeared to be genuine distress, though she was quick to point out the financial implications of losing such a celebrated performer. Victor Hamlin, the production's impresario, arrived still wearing his evening clothes, his usually confident demeanor shaken. "This is catastrophic," he declared, wringing his hands. "Sir Aubrey wasn't merely our star, he was the heart of this entire production. Without him, we face complete ruin." Miss Vane, having composed herself sufficiently to provide a statement, described finding the door locked, which she found strange. Sir Aubrey was particular about his privacy after performances, she explained, her voice trembling slightly. But he would never have locked himself in. He always said locked doors were for guilty consciences. Timothy Morse, Sir Aubrey's devoted dresser and personal assistant, stood nearby with red-rimmed eyes. "He was in splendid spirits tonight," Timothy whispered. The performance of the Phantom Dance was particularly inspired. He dismissed me at the usual time, saying he wished to reflect on the evening's success. It was his custom, you see. Most intriguing of all was the presence of Madame Zelda Petrova, the mysterious woman who had played the phantom figure in the final scene. A dancer of extraordinary skill but unknown origins, she had been hired specifically for this production, at Sir Aubrey's insistence. Her pale, ethereal beauty and uncanny ability to seem to vanish and reappear on stage had made her performance legendary. Now she stood silently in the shadows, her dark eyes revealing nothing of her thoughts. Inspector Bradshaw's attention was drawn to several curious details. On the dressing table sat an untouched glass of brandy, Sir Aubrey's customary nightcap, and beside it lay an unopened letter bearing elegant feminine handwriting. Most peculiar of all, clutched loosely in the dead man's left hand, was a single white rose, its petals still fresh, though no such flowers had been among the evening's bouquets. The Phantom Dance, Inspector Bradshaw mused aloud, studying the scene. Tell me about this final performance. Timothy's eyes brightened slightly despite his grief. Oh, it was magnificent, Inspector. Sir Aubrey and Madame Petrova performed their pas de deux, the dance of the departed. It's the climax of the play, where the living man dances with the spirit of his lost love. Tonight, something seemed different about it. More real. Somehow, the audience was absolutely spellbound. Different how? The inspector pressed. I cannot say precisely, Timothy admitted, but when they danced, it was as though she truly was a ghost. The way she moved, the way she seemed to float, rather than step. And Sir Aubrey, he appeared almost frightened, yet exhilarated, as if he were dancing with death itself. As dawn approached and the preliminary investigation continued, Inspector Bradshaw found himself increasingly troubled by the circumstances. The locked room, the untouched brandy, the mysterious letter, the white rose, and most puzzling of all, the complete absence of any apparent cause of death created a mystery that defied conventional explanation. It was Lady Montfort who made the suggestion that would prove pivotal. Inspector, she said quietly, there is a gentleman of considerable reputation in such matters, Monsieur Hercule Poirot. He has assisted Scotland Yard in similarly perplexing cases. I believe this mystery requires his particular expertise. Inspector Bradshaw, recognizing the limits of conventional investigation when faced with such an enigmatic crime, agreed. As the first grey light of morning filtered through the theatre's stained-glass windows, a telegram was dispatched to the neat flat in Whitehaven Mansions, requesting the immediate assistance of London's most celebrated detective. The stage was set quite literally for Hercule Poirot to enter what would prove to be one of his most psychologically complex cases, where the boundary between performance and reality, between the living and the dead, would blur in ways that would challenge even his legendary powers of deduction. For in this theatre of shadows and secrets, everyone had played a role, and the final act was yet to be performed. By dawn's first light, the remaining company had been gathered in the theatre's elegant salon, where Inspector Bradshaw maintained his vigil over the perplexing circumstances. Lady Montfort sat rigidly beside the cold hearth, her composure a masterpiece of aristocratic control, while Victor Hamlin paced the Persian carpet with barely contained agitation. Miss Vane clutched her handkerchief like a lifeline, her earlier hysteria replaced by a fragile calm that seemed ready to shatter at the slightest provocation. Timothy Morse huddled in a velvet chair, his red-rimmed eyes darting nervously between his companions, while Madame Petrova remained an enigma in the shadows, her ethereal stillness more unsettling than any display of emotion. The tension was palpable, each person acutely aware that they were not merely witnesses but potential suspects in a mystery that defied conventional explanation. Inspector Bradshaw had questioned them repeatedly about the white rose, the unopened letter, the locked door, yet their answers yielded nothing but deeper puzzles. The sound of precise footsteps on marble announced the arrival they had been anticipating. Hercule Poirot entered the salon with characteristic deliberation, his immaculate appearance unchanged despite the early hour. His green eyes surveyed the assembled group with the keen interest of a connoisseur, examining a particularly complex work of art, already beginning to discern the psychological currents that flowed beneath their carefully maintained facades. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his precise voice cutting through the morning tension like a blade through silk. I am Hercule Poirot. Inspector Bradshaw has acquainted me with this most curious affair. His keen green eyes moved methodically across each face, cataloguing the subtle tells that betrayed their inner turmoil. Lady Montfort's rigid composure masking deeper currents, Victor Hamlin's barely contained agitation, Miss Vane's fragile calm that trembled on the edge of collapse, Timothy's raw grief, and most intriguingly, Madame Petrova's ethereal stillness that seemed almost otherworldly. A great actor dies mysteriously in a locked chamber, Poirot continued, adjusting his immaculate cufflinks with characteristic precision. Clutching a white rose that should not exist, beside secrets that may never be revealed. But Poirot, he does not believe in impossibilities, only in the failure of the little grey cells to perceive the truth. His gaze lingered thoughtfully on the assembled group. You see, in my experience, the most passionate crimes often spring from the deepest devotions. Love, loyalty, artistic fervor, these emotions, they burn so brightly they can consume both victim and perpetrator. He paused, allowing his words to settle like dust in sunlight. Now, I must examine where this tragedy unfolded. But first, who among you saw Sir Aubrey last alive? The question settled over the salon like a shroud, and Poirot observed with keen interest how each person's composure shifted, almost imperceptibly. Timothy Morse spoke first, his voice trembling with grief. I helped him from his costume after the final bow, Monsieur Poirot. He dismissed me at 11:20, saying he wished to savor the evening's triumph in solitude. It was his custom after particularly successful performances. Miss Vane's handkerchief twisted in her grip. I stopped by his door at 11:30 to bid him good night. He called out that he required but 5 minutes more. No visitors yet, Estelle, were his exact words. His voice seemed distant. Somehow, Victor Hamlin cleared his throat nervously. I sent word about the provincial tour arrangements around 11:40. When I received no reply, I assumed he'd already departed through the stage door. Lady Montfort's fingers tightened on her reticule. He was expected at my private reception. I sent my card with an usher, but it was never returned. All eyes turned to Madame Petrova, who had remained ethereally still. Her voice, when it came, carried traces of distant lands. After our final bow, he whispered to me, tonight we danced with the truth itself. He seemed transformed. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And now, Inspector, the scene itself awaits our examination. The ascent to Sir Aubrey's dressing room carried the weight of ceremony, Poirot's measured steps echoing through corridors that had witnessed countless theatrical triumphs. Inspector Bradshaw unlocked the sealed door with reverent care, stepping aside as the Belgian detective absorbed his first glimpse of the enigmatic scene. Poirot remained motionless in the doorway for a full minute. The untouched brandy gleamed like liquid amber beside the mysterious letter, while Sir Aubrey sat frozen in his midnight blue costume, the white rose stark against the elaborate embroidery. Observe, Inspector, Poirot murmured, stepping delicately into the room. The chair faces, not the mirror, but the door he turned when someone entered. The brandy remains untouched, yet his hands bear the impression of recent placement upon the table. His keen gaze swept the floor. Here, rosin dust by the skirting board, a dancer's calling card. Ne sais pas. Most compelling was Sir Aubrey's expression, not peaceful sleep, nor pain, but something far more profound. It is recognition, mes amis. Poirot continued thoughtfully. as though he encountered someone entirely unexpected. Behind him, Timothy whispered. He looks as though he saw a ghost. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. Perhaps, mon ami. That is precisely what occurred. Poirot approached the white rose with the delicacy of a botanist examining a rare specimen. Ah, souvenir de la malmaison, he murmured, his trained eye identifying the distinctive petals. A variety most uncommon in London florists during autumn months. Yet observe soil traces upon the stem, suggesting recent cutting from a private garden. His magnifying glass revealed something extraordinary embedded within the rose's stem, a tiny fragment of silver thread identical to the embroidery adorning Sir Aubrey's midnight blue costume. The thread appeared freshly torn, not aged through performance wear. Inspector, regard the floor, Poirot continued, tracing patterns in the air above pale dust scattered near the wainscoting. Rosen, a dancer's necessity. See how it forms a constellation from door to chair, with this perfect crescent suggesting the placement of a point shoe. The unopened letter bore elegant feminine script and traces of jasmine perfume, its wax seal displaying a griffin crest. Most intriguing was the door key's position angled inconsistently for Sir Aubrey's natural grip, its surface bearing amber powder residue distinct from stage makeup. The evidence speaks of an intimate encounter, Poirot declared thoughtfully. Someone bearing roses and secrets. Someone whose presence transformed recognition into what? Fear? Joy? Wonder? He straightened decisively. Bring me Madame Petrova's performance shoes immediately. Timothy returned with delicate satin point shoes, their ribbons still bearing traces of the evening's performance. Poirot examined them with meticulous care, his magnifying glass revealing details that made his green eyes sharpen with interest. He pressed one shoe lightly against a clean cloth, then compared the resulting impression to the crescent-shaped dust patterns scattered across the dressing-room floor. Most illuminating, he murmured, his voice carrying that particular tone of discovery. These shoes have been cleaned since the performance, then freshly dusted with rosin, a curious practice for someone who has completed their evening's work. His keen gaze swept between the pristine soles and the floor markings. Yet observe, Inspector, the patterns do not precisely match. The crescents are too shallow, the distribution too uniform. Moving to examine the white rose more closely, Poirot noted how the embedded silver thread caught the morning light. This fragment was torn recently, not through performance wear. Someone handled both Sir Aubrey's costume and this bloom in the same moment. He straightened, his expression thoughtful. The evidence suggests an encounter with someone who wished to appear as a dancer, yet lacked the authentic movements of the profession. Inspector Bradshaw frowned. An impostor? Perhaps, Poirot replied enigmatically, or someone playing a role they had not performed in many years. The jasmine scent, lingering in the dressing room, drew Poirot's attention back to the unopened letter, its griffin crest gleaming in the morning light. Inspector, this perfume, it is not from the theatre, nor from any of our assembled company. It speaks of gardens, of memories carefully preserved. His keen eyes noted how the amber powder on the door key caught the light with an almost ethereal quality, unlike any stage makeup he had encountered. Descending to the salon, Poirot observed the subtle shift in atmosphere as Lady Montfort's composure tightened almost imperceptibly. Her signet ring bore the identical griffin crest, and when she adjusted her position, the faintest trace of jasmine wafted through the air. "Madame," he said with characteristic courtesy, "your family maintains extensive gardens, perhaps. The cultivation of roses requires such dedication, particularly varieties that bloom beyond their natural season." Lady Montfort's response came with practiced smoothness, yet her fingers betrayed the slightest tremor. "Our conservatory is adequate for our needs, Monsieur Poirot." "Ah, but of course," Poirot murmured, his green eyes thoughtful, "and yet." The evidence suggests our mysterious visitor possessed not only access to rare blooms, but also knowledge of Sir Aubrey's most private habits. Someone who understood his customs, his vulnerabilities, someone from his distant past, perhaps. The weight of Poirot's inquiry settled over the salon like a descending curtain, and he observed with keen satisfaction how each person's composure shifted under his gentle yet relentless probing. Lady Montfort's aristocratic mask slipped for the briefest moment, revealing something raw beneath grief, perhaps, or a guilt carefully buried beneath decades of propriety. "You see," Poirot continued with deceptive casualness, his green eyes moving deliberately between the assembled suspects, the little grey cells whisper of connections spanning many years. Sir Aubrey was not always the celebrated actor we knew once. He was young, passionate, perhaps even reckless in matters of the heart. Timothy's voice cracked with sudden emotion. He spoke sometimes of his early days, before fame found him. There was a woman, a dancer, who disappeared from his life suddenly. When he mentioned her, his eyes held such sorrow. The dresser's hands trembled as he continued. "Last night, near 11:30, I smelled jasmine in the corridor and heard a key turn. But Sir Aubrey never locked his door during performances." Miss Vane's grip on her handkerchief tightened until her knuckles whitened. "After the final dance, he whispered to me, 'The curtain falls for me tonight, Estelle.'" He meant to announce his retirement at Lady Montfort's reception. Victor Hamlin's pacing ceased entirely, his body rigid with sudden tension. The provincial tour contracts, the insurance policies without Sir Aubrey, we face complete financial ruin. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, his gaze returning to the evidence. And yet, his customary brandy remained untouched, a man of such rigid habits, distracted from his most cherished ritual. Something profound occurred in that locked room, something that demanded his complete attention. His eyes glittered with growing understanding. Someone from his past had finally returned to claim what was never truly finished between them. The revelation of Timothy's observations sent ripples of tension through the salon, each person processing the implications with visible unease. Poirot approached the unopened letter with renewed interest, his green eyes studying the griffin crest with the precision of a jeweler examining a precious stone. "Inspector, if you would permit the examination of this correspondence." Inspector Bradshaw broke the jasmine-scented seal with careful deliberation, the wax cracking to release another wave of the haunting perfume. As he read the contents, his expression shifted from curiosity to bewilderment. 11:30. Leave your door unlatched. 1 white rose, and you shall know I am no dream. C. A collective intake of breath swept through the assembled company. Lady Montfort's composure, already strained, tightened further as all eyes turned toward her. "The handwriting is not mine," she declared with aristocratic firmness, though her voice carried the slightest tremor. Poirot accepted the letter with characteristic delicacy, his magnifying glass revealing details that made his eyebrows rise with interest. "Indeed, madame, the paper bears your watermark, the perfume your signature jasmine, yet observe these strokes pull distinctly to the left, while the downward pressure suggests a right-handed writer. The flourished carries continental influences, not the English script of your education." His keen gaze moved across the assembled suspects. Most illuminating is this faint second impression beneath the seal pressed through tissue paper, suggesting hasty forgery. Victor Hamlin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "But surely the access to such materials points directly to opportunity, monsieur." "Not certainty," Poirot interrupted smoothly. At Lady Montfort's reception, any guest might borrow stationery, any lady's reticule might be opened, any perfume transferred through the courtesy of social kisses. The theatre teaches us that the most convincing illusions require authentic props obtained through perfectly innocent means. Miss Vane's voice emerged as barely a whisper. "You speak of illusion, Monsieur Poirot, but Sir Aubrey's death was terribly real." "Ah, but that is precisely the point, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. his tone carrying that particular note of discovery that those familiar with his methods had learned to recognize. Someone wished to create the impression of a supernatural encounter, a phantom lover returning from the past. Yet the evidence speaks of careful preparation, of someone who understood both Sir Aubrey's habits and the theatrical arts of deception. The Belgian detective's gaze swept methodically across each face, cataloguing the subtle tells that betrayed their mounting anxiety. The locked door, the untouched brandy, the precisely placed white rose, these were not merely the aftermath of tragedy, but the carefully orchestrated elements of a final performance. Someone among you possesses not only intimate knowledge of Sir Aubrey's private rituals, but also the theatrical skills necessary to stage such an elaborate illusion. Madame Petrova, who had maintained her ethereal silence throughout the questioning, finally stirred slightly, her dark eyes meeting Poirot's with an intensity that seemed to acknowledge some unspoken understanding between them. Madame Petrova's ethereal composure finally shifted, her dark eyes meeting Poirot's with an intensity that seemed to acknowledge some unspoken understanding. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, her accent lending musical quality to each word. "After the final curtain, I discovered items missing from my dressing room. My spare veil, the one I keep for emergencies, and a pair of satin slippers I had not worn this evening." A ripple of tension swept through the salon as the implications settled over the assembled company. Timothy's eyes widened with sudden comprehension. That would explain the jasmine scent in the corridor and why the rosin patterns seemed wrong. Poirot nodded with satisfaction, his green eyes sharpening as another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "Précisément, mon ami. And this amber powder upon the door, key, it is not stage makeup as one might assume, but something far more specific." He produced a small vial from his waistcoat pocket, comparing its contents to the residue. Luminescent powder, used in theatrical effects to create the illusion of supernatural glow under specific lighting conditions. Lady Montfort's rigid posture betrayed the slightest tremor, her fingers unconsciously adjusting her griffin signet ring. The gesture did not escape Poirot's keen observation, nor did the way her jasmine perfume seem to intensify with her mounting anxiety. Poirot continued with characteristic precision. "Someone among you understood not merely Sir Aubrey's private habits, but possessed intimate knowledge of theatrical illusion. Someone who knew that the combination of jasmine perfume, ethereal movement, and carefully applied luminescence would create an overwhelming impression upon a man of Sir Aubrey's romantic temperament and advancing years." Victor Hamlin's pacing had ceased entirely, his face pale with growing realization. "But surely you cannot suggest that someone deliberately—" "I suggest nothing yet, monsieur," Poirot interrupted gently. "I merely observe that someone wished to create the perfect illusion of a phantom lover returning from the past. The question that remains is whether this elaborate performance was intended as a final gift to a dying man's dreams, or something far more sinister." The weight of accusation hung heavy in the morning air, each person acutely aware that the detective's methodical reasoning was drawing inexorably toward a revelation that would expose the carefully guarded secrets lying beneath their theatrical facades. The weight of Poirot's methodical reasoning had created an almost palpable tension in the salon, each person acutely aware that the detective's keen observations were drawing inexorably toward some devastating conclusion. Yet rather than press for immediate revelation, Poirot moved with characteristic deliberation, understanding that truth, like fine wine, required proper timing to achieve its full potency. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said softly, rising from his chair with precise elegance. "The evidence speaks in whispers that grow louder with each observation. But Poirot, he believes in allowing the facts to arrange themselves naturally, like actors finding their proper positions upon the stage." His green eyes swept across the assembled company with renewed intensity. "Inspector, if you would indulge me, I require but a moment's examination of each person's hands and clothing under proper illumination." The request sent a ripple of unease through the group, though none dared refuse. Lady Montfort extended her gloved hands with aristocratic composure, yet Poirot noted how her fingers trembled almost imperceptibly. Miss Vane's hands bore faint traces of stage makeup, but also something more unusual, a barely perceptible shimmer that caught the morning light in unexpected ways. Most revealing was Victor Hamlin's reaction to the request. His confident demeanor cracked slightly as he thrust his hands forward with unnecessary force. And when Poirot's magnifying glass revealed similar luminescent traces on his cuffs, the impresario's face drained of color. "Theatrical effects," he stammered. "One encounters such materials constantly in our profession." "Indeed, monsieur," Poirot agreed mildly. "Yet this particular powder is not commonly used in standard productions. It requires special knowledge, specific suppliers, and most importantly, intimate understanding of its psychological impact upon the observer." His gaze moved meaningfully between the suspects. "Someone among you possessed not merely access to theatrical supplies, but knowledge of Sir Aubrey's deepest vulnerabilities, his romantic nature, his susceptibility to beautiful illusions." Timothy's voice emerged as barely a whisper. "The retirement announcement he planned to make it tonight at Lady Montfort's reception. He said the theatre had given him everything, but now he wished to give something back to life itself." The revelation struck the assembled company like a physical blow. Victor Hamlin's composure shattered entirely, his face contorting with barely suppressed anguish. 40 years of building this company, of creating something magnificent, all destroyed by one man's selfish desire for peace. His voice cracked with emotion before he caught himself, realizing how much his outburst had revealed. Lady Montfort's aristocratic mask slipped for just a moment, revealing depths of calculation that had been carefully hidden beneath her patronly concern. Miss Vane clutched her handkerchief as though it were a lifeline, her eyes darting between her companions with growing desperation. Poirot observed these reactions with the satisfaction of a conductor watching his orchestra respond to subtle cues. "You see," he continued with gentle relentlessness, "someone among you understood that Sir Aubrey's retirement would mean more than the loss of a great performer. It would mean financial ruin, artistic devastation, the collapse of carefully constructed dreams." His voice carried that particular note of discovery that those familiar with his methods had learned to recognize. The phantom who visited him was not a supernatural entity, but someone whose desperation had transformed love, whether for art, for security, or for the man himself, into something far more dangerous. The morning light streaming through the salon windows seemed to grow harsher, casting sharp shadows that made each person appear isolated in their own pool of guilt and fear, as Poirot's methodical investigation continued its inexorable approach toward the truth that lay hidden beneath their carefully maintained facades. Victor Hamlin's emotional outburst had shattered the carefully maintained equilibrium of the salon, and Poirot observed with keen satisfaction how this crack in composure created ripples of revelation throughout the assembled company. The impresario's face remained contorted with anguish as he realized how much his desperate words had betrayed, his hands trembling as he attempted to regain his professional composure. "Monsieur Hamlin," Poirot said with characteristic gentleness that carried an undertone of steel, "your passion for the theatrical arts is most admirable, yet passion unchecked can transform love into something far more dangerous." His green eyes moved methodically across the remaining suspects, cataloguing how each person's facade was beginning to crumble under the mounting pressure. Someone understood that Sir Aubrey's retirement would mean more than the loss of a great performer. It would mean the destruction of dreams, the collapse of carefully constructed lives. Lady Montfort's rigid aristocratic composure finally showed the first genuine crack, her fingers unconsciously adjusting her griffin signet ring as a tremor passed through her carefully controlled expression. "You speak of dreams, Monsieur Poirot," she said quietly, her voice carrying depths of emotion she had previously concealed. But Sir Aubrey lived haunted by one particular dream. He spoke constantly of her Celeste, his lost love from decades past, a dancer who vanished from his life without explanation, leaving him forever tormented by what might have been. The revelation struck the assembled company like a physical blow, each person processing the implications with visible unease. Poirot's eyebrows rose with the satisfaction of a crucial piece falling into place. "Ah, but of course," he murmured thoughtfully, "and someone among you understood that this ancient wound, this romantic vulnerability, could be exploited for one final, devastating performance." Miss Vane's grip on her handkerchief tightened until her knuckles showed white beneath the delicate fabric. "After the phantom dance last night, he whispered to me, 'She has returned to claim what was always hers.' I thought he meant the role, the performance, but now." Her voice trailed off as the full horror of understanding dawned. Poirot approached the window, gazing out at the grey London morning while his mind arranged the final pieces of this theatrical puzzle. The phantom visitor who entered his dressing room carried not merely stolen theatrical props and forged correspondence, but intimate knowledge of a man's deepest vulnerabilities. Someone who understood that the combination of jasmine perfume, luminescent powder, and ethereal movement would create an overwhelming illusion for a romantic soul already weakened by age and memory. Timothy's voice emerged as barely a whisper, his grief-stricken eyes wide with dawning comprehension. The retirement announcement he planned to make it tonight at Lady Montfort's reception. He said he had found peace at last, that Celeste's memory no longer haunted him. He was ready to leave the stage forever. The weight of these revelations settled over the salon like a descending curtain, each person acutely aware that Poirot's methodical investigation had uncovered not merely the mechanics of an elaborate deception, but the desperate human motivations that had driven someone to transform love, whether for art, for security, or for the man himself, into something capable of murder through the cruelest of psychological manipulations. The weight of revelation hung heavy in the morning air as Poirot turned from the window, his green eyes carrying that particular gleam of complete understanding that those familiar with his methods had learned to recognize. The assembled company watched, with mounting tension as the Belgian detective moved with deliberate precision to the center of the salon, his methodical mind having finally arranged all the pieces of this theatrical puzzle. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began with characteristic authority. "The little grey cells have spoken at last, and they reveal a crime most ingenious in its conception, yet fatally flawed by the very desperation that inspired it." His gaze swept across each suspect with methodical intensity, cataloguing the subtle signs of guilt and fear that no amount of theatrical training could completely conceal. "Someone among you understood that Sir Aubrey's planned retirement would destroy not merely careers, but the very foundation upon which lives had been built. The provincial tour contracts, the insurance policies, the financial obligations, all dependent upon one man's continued presence upon the stage." Poirot's voice carried the weight of inexorable logic as he approached Victor Hamlin, whose face had drained of all color. "The luminescent powder upon your cuffs, Monsieur Hamlin, tells its own story. Zinc sulfide, a theatrical compound used to create supernatural effects under specific lighting conditions. Combined with stolen props from Madame Petrova's dressing room, Lady Montfort's jasmine perfume obtained at the evening's reception, and intimate knowledge of Sir Aubrey's romantic vulnerabilities, you created the perfect phantom." Victor Hamlin's hands trembled as he gripped the arms of his chair, his composure cracking under Poirot's relentless exposition. "You cannot possibly suggest that I—" "The evidence speaks more eloquently than words, mon ami," Poirot interrupted gently. "The forged letter bearing Lady Montfort's crest, written with her stolen stationery but betraying your continental hand. The white rose from her conservatory, its silver thread torn from Sir Aubrey's costume during your carefully orchestrated encounter. Most telling of all, the rosin dust scattered with the uncertain steps of one who had never mastered the dancer's art." Lady Montfort's aristocratic composure finally shattered completely, her voice emerging as a broken whisper. "Celeste was my daughter, my illegitimate daughter, who danced briefly upon these very boards before scandal drove her away. Sir Aubrey never knew the truth, never understood why she vanished so suddenly from his life. She died in Paris 3 years ago, and he was finally ready to find peace with her memory. The revelation struck the assembled company like lightning, illuminating connections that had remained hidden in shadow. Miss Vane gasped audibly, while Timothy's grief-stricken eyes widened with dawning comprehension of the cruel manipulation that had been perpetrated upon his beloved employer. Poirot nodded with satisfaction, the final piece falling into place. And so we have the perfect psychological weapon, the promise of reunion with a lost love, the exploitation of an old man's romantic dreams. You understood, Monsieur Hamlin, that Sir Aubrey's heart was already weakened by age and emotion. The shock of believing he was encountering Celeste's ghost would be more than his system could bear. The locked door presents no mystery to one who understands theatrical mechanics, Poirot continued with methodical precision. A simple length of fine wire passed beneath the door allowed you to turn the key from the corridor after Sir Aubrey collapsed, creating the illusion of a room sealed from within. The untouched brandy, the expression of profound surprise he was expecting not poison, but reunion. Victor Hamlin's facade crumbled entirely, his voice emerging as a broken confession. He would have destroyed us all with his selfish desire for peace. 40 years of building this company, of creating something magnificent, all ruined by one man's retirement. The Phantom Dance could become reality, one final performance that would. Full horror of his actions settled over the salon. The morning light streaming through the tall windows seemed to grow harsher, casting sharp shadows that isolated each person in their own pool of revelation and despair, as Poirot's methodical investigation reached its penultimate moment. The instant when theatrical illusion was stripped away to reveal the devastating human truth beneath, leaving only justice to complete the final act of this tragic drama. Inspector Bradshaw stepped forward with quiet authority as Victor Hamlin's confession settled over the salon like a funeral shroud. The impresario offered no resistance, his theatrical composure finally stripped away to reveal the broken man beneath. "I meant only to frighten him into postponing retirement," he whispered, his voice cracked with the weight of destroyed dreams. "The theatre was everything. How could I let one selfish decision destroy what we had built?" The handcuffs closed with cold finality as Lady Montfort buried her face in her hands, her aristocratic facade shattered by decades of hidden grief. "My poor Celeste," she whispered, and Sir Aubrey, haunted to the very end by what he could never understand. Miss Vane clutched her handkerchief like a lifeline, tears streaming down her face as she processed the cruel manipulation of her beloved's romantic heart. Timothy stood in stunned silence, his loyal devotion betrayed by the very person who should have protected his master's legacy. Madame Petrova remained ethereally still, her dark eyes reflecting a sadness that suggested she had recognized the deception from its earliest moments. Poirot observed the scene with characteristic precision, his green eyes softening with understanding. "The greatest tragedy, mes amis, is not that Sir Aubrey died believing he had encountered his lost love, but that passion for art, when corrupted by desperation, becomes the most dangerous of human emotions. Victor Hamlin sought to preserve beauty through ugliness, to maintain life through death, a paradox that the little grey cells cannot accept. As Victor was led away, Poirot adjusted his immaculate cufflinks with deliberate care. "The curtain falls for all of us eventually," he observed quietly. "The wisdom lies in accepting that final bow with grace, rather than fighting it with measures that corrupt everything we have sought to create." With characteristic dignity, Hercule Poirot gathered his hat and cane, departing into the grey London morning where ordinary life continued its eternal rhythm, leaving behind a theatre forever changed by the revelation that even the most beautiful illusions cannot mask the darker truths of human nature when desperation transforms love into its most dangerous opposite.